On November 15th, 2024, Valve released a 2-hour documentary about Half-Life 2, chronicling its development, the challenges they faced while making it, and all the lessons that they've learned since Half-Life 2's release 20 years ago. At the end of the documentary, the final quote from the company's founder and leader, Gabe Newell, I find is rather interesting.
I think that Half-Life represents a tool we have and promises made to customers to capitalize on innovation and opportunities to build game experiences that haven't been involved previously. And I think that there are no shortage of those opportunities facing us as an industry right now.
I think this is an admission that now, more than ever, Valve is primed to finally make the game that they've wanted to make. A game that they've promised themselves that they'll make, and a game that they've promised to us, the fans and the wider gaming world. The long-awaited Half-Life sequel. And I think these documentaries are a good way to gauge on how far Valve and the Half-Life games have come since their rather humble beginnings. And if I'm being completely blunt, these documentaries are proof that Half-Life 3 is definitely coming, and why its inevitable release will be one of the most monumental games of all time. But first, let's talk about those documentaries. These are 2 feature-length pieces from Valve about the creation of Half-Life 1 and 2. I gotta say, they're amazing. I'd highly recommend them. Links below in the video description if you've never seen them. For those who are unaware, Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2 celebrated their 25th and 20-year anniversary respectively. 2 games that completely changed the gaming world when they released, and their effects are still very much felt today. As part of this celebration, they gave the games away for free on their respective anniversaries. They gave both of them big updates that includes gameplay changes and improvements, bug fixes. All of these things were placed in this neat little websites for both of the games. And of course, the 2 documentaries, chronicling the development and the history of these 2 titanic games. But after watching them both, I realized something. Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2 had so much hindering them or holding them back, ranging from primitive technology, company growing pains, lack of funding, competition from similar games, leaks, lawsuits, and deadlines. There are various other problems as well, but I wanted to narrow down these specific ones. And despite all of those setbacks, we got 2 back-to-back masterpieces from Valve. And now that Half-Life 3 is all but confirmed, I am extremely hopeful, as the future Half-Life 3 won't have any of these problems or limitations. So join me, Internet Wanderer, as I want to break down how each of these aspects hindered Half-Life in the past, and why, as Valve continues to develop this long-fabled Half-Life sequel, this soon-to-be Half-Life 3 will not have the same drawbacks, setbacks, and limitations as its predecessors. Further reinforcing that whenever Valve decides to release this game, it's going to change everything we know about gaming. Hello and welcome, Internet Wanderer. My name is Argonax. I make video reviews, essays, commentaries, and shorts. I hope you enjoy my content enough to do all the YouTube things, such as liking and subscribing. And special thanks to all the channel members, to who I am extremely grateful for their support. Their contributions mean the world to me, and it helps keep the channel going. So, if you'll allow me, let's get back to the topic at hand. Before I delve further into this topic, I just want to give some context as to why Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2 are amazing and so important to the history of games. As, in my opinion, Half-Life is one of those games that ushered in the modern-day FPS, bridging boomer shooters and all first-person shooters that we know today. And its influence isn't just limited to Half-Life, as it has greatly affected how we play post-apocalyptic games, modern-day sci-fi games, any games that have physics engines, and any games that prioritize immersion over everything else. As far as I know, Half-Life 1 was the first game that standardized the WASD R to reload, space to jump control scheme. So whenever I see the Half-Life games, you have to consider that they basically came with all of these innovations and groundbreaking achievements. And then you have to also consider that Valve was able to accomplish this with all of these setbacks at the time. Of course, nothing worth doing is easy. That's why content slop channels are getting more money and views than me. Valve was able to deliver and exceed expectations when these games came out. So again, I'm very happy and excited that Half-Life 3 is seemingly free of any of these problems or hindrances. And I want to tackle how these issues impacted the Half-Life games of the past and why they no longer affect this would-be Half-Life 3. So, let's start off by talking about the first one on the list, primitive technology. Obviously, Half-Life 1 and 2 were both developed in the late 90s and early 2000s respectively. Both of these games were more or less the debut of a new game engine that Valve had made at the time. Half-Life 1 had the Gold Source engine, a heavily modified Quake engine, and Half-Life 2 had the Source engine, a revolutionary engine with emphasis on physics. And now, Valve has recently made the Source 2 engine. However, this engine is mostly untested. There's only a handful of games that are currently running on it. And of the games that currently run on this, only Half-Life Alyx can claim that it's really pushing this engine in any meaningful way. In the Half-Life 1 documentary, they state many times that the game was really held back with the technology of its day, and that's readily apparent given that it's a game from the 90s. But even its later iteration, Half-Life 2, had a lot of examples of it being held back by the limitations of its time as well. For example, the vehicle sections of Half-Life 2. In the documentary, they state many times how they had to trick the player into thinking that the vehicles were moving faster than they really are. They did so by selling the immersion with sounds of the vehicle's engine and the overall vibrations of these said vehicles.
Basically had a whole car engine down to through transmission, down into gearing and differentials and turning the tires. But then it turned out like, oh, we can really only go 15, 20 miles an hour. Otherwise, you would blast through the extents of the map in about 10 seconds, which wasn't going to do anybody any good. People made jumps, they made all these things. Nothing was working. So I was like, oh, you must be doing a jump. I'm just going to turn off gravity on the car for a little while and let it just go and then gradually ramp it back in so that it actually felt like you were jumping.
It was interesting how like the dynamics of the buggy was so much about like the perceived experience versus how it actually like performed.
It just sounds like it's going faster than it is. So Jay and I worked really hard on these engine sounds and this fake transmission and doing all this stuff. But you're really going like 30 miles an hour maybe. So it's like someone just driving around in first gear.
The maps were also held back by the map size limit of the Source engine, meaning that maps couldn't be as big as Valve wanted them to be. They somewhat circumvented this with winding roads and puzzles that required the player to dismount from the vehicles, and copious amount of fog. Silent Hill developers are proud of that one. So while in reality the vehicles of Half-Life 2 could only go about 25 miles per hour in maps that weren't all that big, but that really doesn't matter. The only thing that really matters is the illusion of scale and speed, something that Valve has failed and succeeded in Half-Life 1 as well, namely the on-a-rail level that failed to sell scale, and the success of the intro tram section, which showcased how well Valve was able to work within its limitations at the time. I can list examples all day long, but the important part is that Valve finally has a new game engine, and it's about time that we see a new and true numbered game out of it. These ones don't count. Next up, company growing pains. This one's a little more straightforward. Obviously, at the time, Valve was a relatively small company. I mean, they kinda are still a relatively small company now, but even more so back then. And while they were trying to figure out how exactly they wanted to manage their company and how they would tackle game making and the whole game making process as a whole, they were trying to make revolutionary games with no experience at the time. Gabe Newell himself even states that he has no real game making experience. He says so in the documentary.
One of the big challenges with Half-Life was just establishing the company and sort of determining whether or not we could actually make video games at all. Like my background was operating systems and spreadsheets. Mike Harrington, who was the co-founder, had a similar background. He had a little more game experience than I did. But with Half-Life, we were pretty sure we were going to fail. And then Half-Life was successful. It was like a lot more successful than we had any reason to expect. And now we had to follow it up, right? We didn't want to have a sophomore slump. We didn't want to be a one and done kind of company. So now we had the terrifying obligation to our customers and to our fans to somehow advance our game design skills, our technology, all needed to level up for the second game.
In their early days, Valve would just hire teenagers who literally had no game-making experience at all. It was a gamble that honestly turned out in their favor, but you can see how they were willing to pick up kinda anybody at the time. Which is funny because nowadays, Valve is one of the most notoriously difficult companies for anyone to get a job at. And it shows because nowadays, the people that Valve has employed under its belt are amazing. Veteran game makers, and not just Valve alma maters, but also people from gigantic game studios who have been recently hired into Valve. Gaben Follower puts it best, as he lists all the different people that Valve has recently employed.
Developers of physical engines for games from Rockstar Games or from the Forza series, where the gameplay is focused on driving cars. Many level designers from ID Software, Epic Games, Respawn Entertainment, Sucker Punch, and Raven, who worked on games like Doom Eternal, Fortnite, Apex Legends, Titanfall, Red Dead Redemption, GTA, and Call of Duty.
So, in other words, while Valve's overall employee number is still comparatively low compared to other AAA companies, Valve is still poised better than ever to make a new, groundbreaking title. Next up, lack of funding. This one is also a little obvious. Valve had a publisher back in the 90s, and by the time that the mid-2000s came around, they eventually became a private company, but they didn't exactly have the expendable money and funds that they do now. They're a small company trying to make groundbreaking games. It's a tale as old as time. Any proper visionary studio would want to be able to make amazing games on tight budgets, and we see it all the time. From major games of the past to indie games of now. Working within a limitation breeds creativity, of course. But sometimes it can get a little ridiculous. Like in the documentary, Gabe Newell states that he had to put his house up for mortgage during the development of the games.
There came a point where Gabe had pretty much used up his liquid assets. I mean, he was like, should I put the house on the market? And I was like, yeah, I think it's the time where you put the house on the market if we want to keep going.
The company was pretty close to going bankrupt. I was pretty close to going personally bankrupt. We went all in. It's like there was no money left.
A bit of a spoiler and some context to that clip I just showed you. They're mostly talking about the fact that they were almost going bankrupt because they were being sued at the time, which I will cover in the later section. But this is still related to the fact that they were a small company, and any problems that they would have faced would definitely stifle the development of any ongoing project or game. So at least in this instance, I think it's still relevant to the fact that they were a growing company, and facing any problem might become a big problem if they don't have enough resources, funds, or help in order to tackle these problems. Half-Life 2 was very much a make it or break it game for Valve, because if Half-Life 2 failed, the company might have gone under. No, it definitely would have gone under. So whereas nowadays Valve has the infinite money printer that is Steam, and Dota skins and Counter-Strike skins definitely help. So now they have no higher-ups to please. They are free to work at their own time, at their own leisure, sometimes to a detriment. They're very slow at making games, if you haven't noticed. But at the same time, they have no real reason to make a Half-Life 3, or any new game for that matter, other than the fact that they just want to do it. So in a twisted kind of way, isn't that the best reason to make a game? When you're not worried about the financial incentive, you're only doing it to prove that you can make an amazing game. To innovate where you think that everything has been figured out. To create something new when people are so busy recycling the same ideas. It also helps that, they're very rich. Next, we have competition from similar games. Now listen, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was no shortage of games that was trying to do the same thing or similar things to the Half-Life games. Honestly, just take a look at lists of the greatest games of the late 90s and early 2000s, and you'll be surprised at how many of these games could fit similar genres as Half-Life. I'm not saying that this is necessarily a bad thing. In fact, competition breathes innovation and creativity, so more often than not, this can be a good thing. But given that Valve really needed Half-Life to succeed in order for the company to move forward, there was a lot of competition for these games, and Valve really needed them to take off. Which fortunately they did, but that is despite the great competition they had. In the late 90s, you had games like Deus Ex. You still had Doom and Quake floating around. Other big pioneering games like System Shock 2. In the early 2000s, you had Doom 3, Halo. But now, as we move towards the mid-2020s, I doubt there's going to be much competition in the immersive, old-school, single-player FPS genre. Within this decade alone, I think the best we have is like the Doom games, I guess. I'm sure I'm blanking out on a ton of awesome first-person shooter games within this decade, but honestly, most of the breakout FPSs in this decade are not single-player focused. They are almost always online or multiplayer or something like that. So at least in that regard, whatever new Half-Life game Valve decides to cook up, there's not going to be a lot of other games trying to compete for that whole single-player FPS thing. But I won't lie, I might be completely dead wrong about this section, so let me know in the comment section below if there's any notable single-player FPSs within this decade of 2020 onwards that was really, really good. I can't seem to remember any other than the Doom games. I guess Stalker 2 is there, but let me know in the comments. I actually want to know. For this next section, I'm just going to condense these two categories into one and just label it as direct outside forces, because that's what these essentially were. Whether it be from a lone hacker or an entire company trying to screw Valve over, these two kind of end up becoming a similar problem for Valve at the time. But first, let's cover the first one, leaks. In the documentary, they stress multiple times how much that having their game leaked early was such a massive hindrance to the development of Half-Life 2.
When something like this happens, there's not like a big sign saying you've been hacked and somebody has access. Like, you start off with something that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and you start pulling on that sweater thread.
Because whenever the news broke to the team that they got hacked, all development was completely halted because they needed to make sure that everything else was secure, that there was no other backdoor or compromised files that might be further leaked any more than it already was. But not only was it a hindrance to the actual development of the game, but it also in terms of the morale for the team and the company.
The build, all the source code.
I was riffing ideas for, I think in particular, Counter-Strike. That information ended up on one of the internet chat rooms. And only 2 people knew the contents of that email. It was, of course, Gabe and myself. And I went to ITG and said, this could only have come from a leaked email. We got to figure out how that got out there.
But I remember at some point Gabe walking around, you know, like one of those moments like, turn your computer off, something just happened.
That's right.
Like I remember being on my desk and he coming like, turn your computer off, I think we're being hacked. And I was, what? Like, I didn't know what to do. I actually did not know what to do.
I remember coming in that morning and figuring it out, and it just felt like someone had just punched me in the gut.
You know, it's like the bit in movies where like after an explosion, they'll have a scene where someone's like staggering around the street and everyone's like,
yeah.
What's this mean? Like, can we still keep working on the game?
Yeah.
Like, is someone just going to release the whole game tomorrow?
Imagine having all of your unfinished work shown off to the public. All of that, all the expectations that people had, now they get to see the unfinished work. And then people start to form opinions about, oh, this game is a lot more unfinished than I thought it would be. It brings people down, and it legitimately did. People thought that all of their work had been for nothing when the news broke that they got leaked.
And one of the things I think that's pretty interesting is how much the leak of the game, the hack of our network and the leak of the game, how much that kind of shattered that confidence.
It was like, you know, having a movie that you're working on be spoiled for the world. That's how it felt. Because we knew it would be hard for people to know that that existed and not go look at it all. It looked all broken to us and it just felt really demoralizing.
Oh man, I was seriously affected by that. I was pretty angry, so I don't know. It kind of affected me for a while. You know, having it called the beta when it was not even close to being a beta. Work in progress, you know. Wasn't really ready to be seen yet.
Normally the office is pretty vibrant and loud, and people are riding scooters in the hallway and doing all sorts of stuff. Gabe's tube and throat singing, and it got very still and very quiet. I remember that. That was very eerie. That was the game that was going to make or break the company. We didn't know if we were going to have to go find jobs.
Not only did it show everybody that we were not anywhere near where we said we would be, but all the work that we had in progress, all the plans that we were making were just laid out bare. And so a lot of us just thought, oh, we're toast. We've worked so hard. Are we going to go bankrupt?
An early build of Half-Life 2 was leaked by a German teenager, and eventually Valve was able to work with the FBI to arrest the guy by sending him a message asking if he wanted to get a job at Valve. If nothing else, because of Valve's overall secretive nature, and of course the fact that they learned their lesson from these leaks, I highly doubt something like this is going to happen again. Could another early build of Half-Life 3 be leaked sometime in the future? I wouldn't rule it out, it's definitely a possibility, but given the lessons that I've learned from their past leaked experiences, I highly doubt it's going to happen again. All the knowledge that the Half-Life community knows about this upcoming Half-Life 3 was files that was left over from Dota 2 and Deadlock. So those don't necessarily constitute a leak, they're just leftover files. So at least moving forward, I think in terms of Valve's overall cybersecurity, I think they're pretty much set. Now, cybersecurity is one thing, but legal security is completely another thing. So, lawsuits. In the Half-Life 2 documentary, they mentioned the legal battles they had to do with a Korean firm that was stopping them from releasing copies of Half-Life 2. There's also that somewhat recent lawsuit in the UK about Valve using Steam to allegedly overcharge British gamers and developers. Both of those lawsuits that I just mentioned are more so related to Steam and online distribution and not so much Half-Life. But still, Steam is so ubiquitous in the modern gaming age that we take it for granted, honestly. And with hindsight, I think it's a good thing that the first company to pioneer an online storefront was Valve. Imagine if it was another company. EA, Ubisoft, take your pick, honestly. They definitely would have charged you for operating their online store as a service. I mean, they already do that nowadays. Look at companies like Sony and Nintendo. That's basically what they do with PlayStation Network or whatever online BS Nintendo does. I don't know. I don't play consoles. What am I, a casual or something? I won't go into all the details about these lawsuits. This is actually related to that clip that I showed earlier about Gabe Newell potentially going bankrupt, because it was a very stressful time. Development costs was racking up, and so were legal costs. But ultimately, Valve was able to win these lawsuits and was able to get their real priority back on track, which was developing the game. Again, I already showed this clip earlier, but I wanted to share this clip of Gabe Newell being completely unfazed by a shark chasing him while he was swimming.
There are certain things that I'm kind of a weird person in a number of dimensions. Like, I don't really think, oh, this is super scary. Like, I don't have an emotional response to it. I just say, well, this is what we're doing. This is how, and we'll see how it plays out. So I don't think it was super stressful to me, right? I mean, it didn't really bother me. Like, I was diving in South Africa recently, and a shark tried to bite me a couple of times, and the people around me were way more freaked out than I was. I was like, oh, a shark's trying to bite me. I should get away from the shark. Whereas other people were having like, oh, a shark, it's trying to bite somebody, and I just think that's how I'm wired. I don't think it's anything that speaks to my character or anything. It's like I just seem to not get particularly agitated around risk, which probably means I take on more risk than at times than most sane people would, which can be a positive, or you can wreck a bunch of other people's lives being in the neighborhood of your risk indifference.
So regardless, I'm happy that Valve was able to win these lawsuits and was able to set a foundation and precedent that PC storefronts do not charge its users for the services that they provide. Not necessarily related to anything, but Valve was indirectly involved in the Epic versus Apple lawsuit that happened a while back. It must have been a great time for Tim Sweeney, the CEO of Epic, because he had to call upon one of his biggest rivals in order to win that case, or at least I think he did. Tim Sweeney really doesn't like Gabe Newell. I wonder why. And as far as I know, the only ongoing lawsuit that Valve has right now is the UK Wolfire overcharging lawsuit that's going on. And I get the overall feeling that that's going to be settled rather soon. So in other words, at least as far as outside factors are concerned in the regards of interrupting the development of a Half-Life 3, I don't think the game has anything to worry about. And finally, deadlines. Now listen, Valve is a notoriously bad company when it comes to doing anything in a timely manner. When they were developing Half-Life 1, they were under Sierra Entertainment, and thus they had to follow a deadline which they had set for Half-Life 1's release, which Valve actually missed, and the release of the game had to be pushed back multiple times. In the Half-Life 2 documentary, it's revealed that Half-Life 2 Episode 3 was pushed back in order for everyone in the company to help develop the new game that Valve was making at the time, Left 4 Dead. And then later, they admit that after finishing Left 4 Dead, they could have gone back and continued work on Episode 3, but they just thought it was too late. They thought that we've already missed the deadline, so why bother delivering a late product? Admittedly, they do state that abandoning Episode 3 was a mistake. So if nothing else, that's another admission that they kind of made a boo-boo, and they're trying to rectify that, maybe with a brand new game, who's to say?
Left 4 Dead needed kind of an all-hands-on sort of an effort to ship. And so we put down Ep3 to go help Left 4 Dead, and it was a really tight shipping schedule, and it required a lot of work from everybody to get out the door, and it was worth it. I mean, it was.
Yeah, Left 4 Dead came out.
Left 4 Dead came out great, but it took long enough, and this is the tragic and almost comical thing about it, was it took long enough that then by the time we considered going back to episode 3, the argument was made like, well, we missed it, it's too late now. You know, and we really need to make a new engine and, you know, to continue the Half-Life series and all that. And now that just seems, in hindsight, so wrong.
Yeah.
You know, we could have definitely gone back and spent 2 years to make episode 3.
Gabe Newell also states that if it wasn't for the Half-Life episodes, Valve would have never made Dota 2. Now, I'm a fairly involved Dota 2 player, and if I'm being completely honest, I wish he expounded on that statement a lot more. I don't see how the Half-Life episodes led to Dota 2's creation, but it's Valve. They're not going to say anything.
And you can't get lazy and say, oh, we're moving the story forward. That's copping out of your obligation to gamers, right? Yes, of course they love the story. They love many, many aspects of it. But sort of saying that your reason to do it is because people want to know what happens next. You know, we could have shipped it. Like, it wouldn't have been that hard. You know, the failure was, my personal failure was being stumped. Like, I couldn't figure out why doing episode 3 was pushing anything forward. If it weren't for the episodes, there'd be no such thing as Dota. And I know that sounds really weird, but it was the things that we learned in developing the episodes that led to, you know, Team Fortress, to more rapid updates.
So the biggest benefit of all of this is that Half-Life 3 has to abide to no such deadline. There's no expectation for when it's going to be released, and thus Valve can decide whenever that game comes out. When Half-Life Alyx was announced, the game was more or less complete, as the gap of time between Half-Life Alyx's trailer reveal and to the final game's full release was only like 4 or 5 months. Whereas Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2 had initial release dates that was announced long before either game was even close to being finished. Both Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2 were completely overhauled multiple times within that span of time, from the initial announcement to the official release. That sets a lot of expectations and stress for the development team, which I think Valve has pretty much learned. So if ever we actually get any news about Half-Life 3, you can bet your sweet ass that that game is almost complete. So in other words, having no deadline, it's a good thing for the Valve team, it's a bad thing for us having to wait another I don't know what, 12 years, 15 years, 20 years? Oh my god, Gabe, can you release the game now, please? So that brings us to the last chapter of this video. Why do we even want Half-Life 3 to happen? Gabe Newell states himself that Half-Life is a vessel for Valve to showcase how much games have evolved and can improve with new technology. And honestly, when we're in an age where more and more games are becoming reboots and recycled content, and a lot of questionable live service games, something that Valve isn't exactly innocent of, I think some major innovation in games is something that we need now more than ever. It definitely helps that Half-Life 3 is one of the most anticipated games of all time. This isn't exactly a spoiler, but I've seen a lot of people play Half-Life Alyx, and towards the end of the game, a lot of people playing it, longtime fans and even people who are fairly new to the franchise, all have the same reaction. They were in awe at the end of the game, and many of them more or less said that they wanted more. They didn't want the game to end. They needed to play more Half-Life. Just look at the reaction and the genuine joy and astonishment that these players are going through towards the end of Half-Life Alyx. I'm gonna blur the screen so that way the visuals don't spoil anything about the story, and I'm just gonna make sure that their reactions don't give away any specifics to the ending.
Oh. No, please don't end. Please don't end. Please don't end. Please keep going. There's a part 2 to the game, right? That was we beat half the game, right? No! I want more. I want more so bad. I want more so fucking bad.
Oh fuck. Oh fuck. Oh, thank God no one can see me cry right now, dude. Holy fuck.
Oh, what? Don't. No. 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 Oh my God. No, 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 no! Let me play! Let me play, Valve! What? Oh, that's so fucking cool. What?
One interesting thing about Half-Life is that it's never actually been about the story. It definitely has a story, and its story is very good. There's many fans and players out there that enjoy the story more than any other aspect in Half-Life, but it's clear that the story just acts as a justification for new mechanics and gameplay features in these Half-Life games. Again, this doesn't mean that the universe of Half-Life isn't deep or interesting, because it definitely is. But again, gameplay and innovation will always come first. A good example of this is the most recent title in the Half-Life universe, that being Half-Life Alyx, which I have covered quite a bit in the past on this channel, links below. Half-Life Alyx is a rather complex beast. It's a lot of things to a lot of different people, and assuming you've heard of this game before, you're probably gonna fall under one of the following camps in regards to your opinion of this game. You might think that Half-Life Alyx and VR might just be a gimmick. You might think it's just a really long tech demo, a proof of concept maybe, perhaps a bold experiment, or it's the Half-Life game we didn't want, or maybe the VR game that we always needed. But of all the things that Half-Life Alyx is, I will quote a YouTuber, Noah Cadwell-Gervais, and say that Half-Life Alyx is a promise that there will be a true Half-Life 3 in the future.
Who knows how long Half-Life 3 will take? Likely not even Valve. This last moment, however, I take as a promise. Maybe it'll be another 12 years, but I'll see Gordon again. I'll be Gordon again. And when I do, it'll be with my whole hands and my whole field of vision. A cliffhanger demands you come back to it. It's an inherently withholding creative flourish. Alyx ends instead with an invitation. An invitation to meet again when the future is closer. I can wait. The future always gets here eventually. And often, it is a Half-Life game that lets me know when that future has arrived.
But if you want a less dramatic version, Half-Life Alyx is the best AAA VR game out there. And from a mechanical aspect, it proves that VR is the future of gaming. And from a story aspect, without going too much into spoilers, this is a 15-hour, fully polished and realized Half-Life game that is meant to act as a 20-second trailer for Half-Life 3. Will Half-Life 3 be in VR? Everyone who's played through Half-Life Alyx agreed that the next Half-Life game should be in VR, but there are also those who have never played Half-Life Alyx who might be disappointed if the next numbered sequel in the Half-Life games is VR only. Personally, I am of the opinion that it might be VR only, but to help sweeten the deal of hearing that Half-Life 3 might be VR only, I have a theory. A theory that Half-Life 3 might be feasible if it is VR only if Valve is able to make VR a lot more affordable and a lot more accessible. Look at it this way. Valve has an entire department dedicated to developing hardware, and over the last few years, Valve has made premier technology in both handheld console devices like the Steam Deck and top-of-the-line VR headsets like the Valve Index. Both of these machines are very good at very specific things. Now, what would happen if you combined the strengths of both of these machines? You get a very powerful, standalone, wireless headset that is able to render incredible graphics on its own without any PC required. Effectively, by combining their strengths, they mitigate their weaknesses. So, a standalone VR headset that has the affordability, power, and accessibility of a Steam Deck. Of course, with more up-to-date and modern technology powering it. When I put it like that, a VR-only Half-Life 3 might not sound too far-fetched. But regardless if Half-Life 3 is VR or not, here's some food for thought. In the Half-Life 2 documentary, they feature the voice actors of both G-Man and Dr. Kleiner.
My name is Mike Shapiro, and I am G-Man. I am also Barney. He's always over your shoulder, watching, waiting for the moment to speak. That's where I think he lives.
My name is Harry Robbins. I'm known as Hal Robbins. I have a stage name of Dr. Hal. My only doctorate is in theology from the Church of the Subgenius, which I'm involved in. I played Dr. Isaac Kleiner after I did the voice of a number of different scientists. Mark wrote archaic expressions into my dialogue, and I would say things like, "oh, fi," and so forth.
Is it so far-fetched to think that while they invited them to come over to Valve Studios, they might have done some voice actor work while they were already there, filming for the documentary? This is just a theory, but hey. There's also channels like Tyler McVicker and Gabe Follower who do an extremely good job of digging through Valve's code and looking up for clues about anything regarding Half-Life 3. From what I've seen from their videos, one of Half-Life 2's biggest selling points was, of course, the physics engine, but also memorable and expressive NPCs. So imagine Half-Life 3 with all of the leaked technology behind it, because apparently one of the big selling points of Half-Life 3 is the fact that their NPCs is going to have smart AI and procedural conversations. So imagine top-of-the-line expressive NPCs who can come up with dialogue on the fly. That would be amazing. Hey, another theory could be that the Game Awards are happening sometime soon. Would it be so far-fetched to believe that Geoff Keighley, or whatever the fuck his name is, might do a Valve announcement at this event? He has connections at Valve. He interviewed them a while back when Half-Life Alyx is about to come out, so he has some connections at Valve. But ultimately, I think all of these things are just insignificant. Whether a Half-Life sequel or successor comes out is irrelevant. The legacy and myth of a Half-Life 3 is already a force in of itself. If truly Half-Life 2 Episode 3 came out 10 years ago, its legend and legacy wouldn't have beaten the myth that Half-Life 3 has become. But I, for one, am confident that Half-Life 3 is on the way soon. If I had to give a somewhat conservative estimate, I'd say we'd hear some official news about it in about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And if by chance we get a trailer within that span of time, it's safe to say that the game is almost finished by that point. After all, the gap of time between Half-Life Alyx's trailer to its full release was only 5 months. So now we just have to wait for Valve to deliver, and I'll be there with you, Internet Wanderers, waiting for that day. After all, we already waited this long. What's the harm in waiting just a little bit more? Thanks for watching, Internet Wanderer. Do the YouTube things.